Welcome to the Modern Talk, the space for modern trends of business and economics. Today we are privileged to have with us the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. W.A. Wijewardane. Dr. Wijewardane, we are pleased to have you here for our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Nimna, for having me for your discussion.
So, to begin with whom? Sir, what do you think about the current situation of Sri Lanka? Now, Sri Lanka has been facing a huge economic crisis along with the currency depreciation and other related issues. So, what do you think about the root causes for these issues? Now, certain people complain that certain development projects and investments like Magam Port and the Nelum Kulina, likewise, these investments have been unproductive for our economy. So what do you think about these investments and also the other root causes for the economic crisis that was faced by Sri Lanka?
Well, you have very correctly identified that Sri Lanka had been in a very deep economic crisis. We were in the crisis in year 2022 and year 2023. Now, of course, we are getting out of that crisis situation, and our Sri Lanka situation is now improving tremendously, so that probably within the next say 5 to 6 year time period, we can safely say that Sri Lanka will be out of the crisis. The root cause had been a long one, Nimna, because it had not just started in Sri Lanka. Ever since Sri Lanka became independent in 1948, we had been following some economic policies which were detrimental to the long-term economic growth. For example, we had been providing all kinds of subsidies to people, number one. Number two, we had expanded the government sector over and above the required level of the government sector. That government sector had been unproductive, and we were not being connected to the international trade, because Sri Lanka is a very small country with a very limited amount of natural resources. The only natural resource that we have is our population, people, their brain power. And Sri Lanka should have got into the global market, as it had done during the times of ancient kings also, because we had generated welfare, wealth, prosperity to our people through international trade. What happened was, after the independence, most of the governments that were in power, they followed the policy of anti-trade, so that we were gradually cut off from the global markets, and as a result we had to generate our economic growth from the internal sources. But we have a very small market, only 22 million people now, and our middle class is about 5 million people, very small market. So our the main businesses, main factories could not actually produce enough to expand their operations just by concentrating on the small market. Because of this reason, our exports didn't, though they grew in terms of US dollar terms, but if you compare it with the total size of the economy, which we call the gross domestic product, GDP, as a percentage, the international trade started falling. For example, in year say 2000, our exports were about 20% of our GDP, but by year 2012 it had come down to 12%. What it means is the GDP has grown faster than the growth in the export. Because of this reason, Sri Lanka could not earn enough foreign exchange to meet its import bill, and by that time we had been borrowing from abroad heavily, and so we had to repay those loans as well. So when Gotabaya Rajapaksa became the president in 2019, he had actually inherited the sick economy. His job had been to reverse it, but he didn't do that, because he also followed certain type of policies which were detrimental to the long-term economic growth, and finally by year 2022 Sri Lanka had to declare itself a bankrupt country. So that's the root cause for Sri Lanka's economic crisis.
Right. So now, coming back to the current situation. So it's no secret that our country is running with the IMF support. So what do you think, Dr. Wijewardane, now aren't there any domestic mechanisms that we can use to support our economy along with this IMF support?
Well, going to IMF had been a necessity for Sri Lanka even by year 2019 when Gotabaya Rajapaksa became the president. Most of the independent economists outside the central bank and outside the Ministry of Finance had recommended to him that Sri Lanka should immediately go to IMF and get an IMF support to get out of the massive foreign exchange crisis that had been building in the country. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration and his top economic policymakers didn't listen to that independent voice, and they thought that they would be able to generate economic development just by concentrating on the local economy. So they had followed a certain type of policies which were not also good for the Sri Lanka's economy. So by the time that we had decided to go to IMF in the middle of year 2022, it was too late. But without going to IMF, Sri Lanka has no future in Nimna, because main reason is we are a nation that is consuming more than we are earning, so that our savings are very small, because for anyone to build up an economy, you have to invest money in productive sources like those investment that you had mentioned here. For that purpose, the necessary funds should come from savings of the people, but our savings are very low. As a result, there is a massive savings investment gap, because we are investing more than what we are saving. So as a result, there is no internally generated resources for Sri Lanka to invest in new economic activities. To fill the gap, we had been borrowing. We had been borrowing first from the World Bank, ADB, Asian Development Bank, and various friendly countries, because we were a poor country, therefore we were able to get those loans at very low interest rates, maturing in long periods like 40 years. But when Sri Lanka became a lower middle income country, that particular concessionary funding was stopped for Sri Lanka. Finally what happened was we had to go to the commercial markets and borrow at commercial rates. So heavily we started borrowing from the commercial markets in year 2007 when Mahida Rajapaksa was the president. Then we had expanded it tremendously, and during the time of Ranil Wickremesinghe's government from 2015 to say 2019, they had borrowed heavily from the commercial markets. Those had been borrowed on very high interest rates. We had to pay the interest and also repay the principal amount. By early 2022, Sri Lanka didn't have enough foreign exchange to meet those the foreign loan commitments. So in April, Sri Lanka had to declare that Sri Lanka will not be able to pay them, and we became a bankrupt nation as a result of that.
So now you mentioned that Sri Lanka has been keeping on borrowing. So in this case now that we have come to a point that we cannot borrow anymore, rather than meeting up with the conditions given by the IMF support. So do you think that we can fulfill these conditions given to us within the required period, and are we on the right track with the current government?
Well, of course, we are on the right track. I mean, we'll have to admit the fact that after after Ranil Wickremesinghe became the president, he continued with the IMF program, and he was supported by two top policy makers of the country, the Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe and Secretary, Minister of Finance, Mr. Mahida Wijewardane. They were also supporting Ranil Wickremesinghe. There were three people therefore who were together. And your question that without IMF conditions can we do that? My answer is no. Main reason is what the IMF has prescribed to us is what we would have done on our own. We don't have to get their recommendation to do those things in Sri Lanka. We would have done it on our own, but we had failed to do it. But now, because of the loan conditions that had been given to us, now we have to follow them. So one example is, now, as I told you, we had been living beyond our means. I mean, we had been consuming more than we have been earning. This applies specifically to the government of Sri Lanka. Government gets its revenue from taxation and various other sources, and it's spending much more than on consumption. It's just like somebody has borrowed money for a wedding, and then after the wedding the man is completely bankrupt. We were also in the same situation. Our government had been consuming more than what it had earned. So there was a gap in the revenue of the government, which we call a dis-saving, because our consumption is much more than the earnings. So as a result, the recommendation even at that time by independent economists had been that Sri Lanka will have to increase the revenue part. Now that revenue component didn't go up, and unfortunately for us, the economic policy adopted by Gotabaya Rajapaksa was also not supportive of that, because in 2019 when he became the president, immediately he gave a very attractive unsolicited tax concession to Sri Lankan businesses and people. But he had a valid reason for that. The valid reason is that when you reduce the tax rates, people have more money with them. Individuals have more money to consume, to spend on goods and services. Businesses will have more money to reinvest in the businesses. So this type of economic policies are known as the supply side economic policy, because you are promoting the supply side of the Sri Lanka's economy by giving more money to the hands of the people and giving more money to the businesses. What happened was and also the trend in Sri Lanka is that when you have more money in your hands, the people will start consuming not the locally produced goods but the imported goods. And the businesses, instead of reinvesting the money that had been left with them through these tax cuts, instead of reinvesting them in new business activities, they were just consuming. They were declaring dividends and they were using it. So because of this reason, the tax concessions had driven the government of Sri Lanka to a very perilous state, because the government lost about, say, 800 billion rupees per annum on average. Because of this reason, the tax revenue came down. Then the government had to borrow money from the central bank, which we call the printing of money. That was done massively by the new central bank governor, central bank led by Professor Lakshman, who had believed in that money printing is the way for Sri Lanka to get out of this crisis. So money supply went up. Everybody knows when the money supply goes up, it leads to inflation. So inflation went up to about 70%. When there is inflation, there is a pressure for the exchange rate to depreciate. The exchange rate started depreciating, and since the government did not allow the exchange rate to depreciate, there was a big black market. The margin in the black market was even more than 300 rupees. Official rate was some, say, 200 rupees per US dollar, but in the black market the dollar was traded around, say, 400 to 500 rupees. So because of these reasons, we had gone into the economic crisis which crippled the Sri Lankan economy. At the same time, Gotabaya Rajapaksa had some other unsound economic policies, like converting Sri Lanka's agriculture to organic farming overnight. So he stopped the use of chemical fertilizers. Sri Lanka's agriculture sector had been dependent on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So when you deprive the agriculture of the supply of the needed chemical fertilizers, the agriculture production, tea production, rubber production, coconut production, paddy production, all vegetable production, spices, they came down drastically. Even cinnamon industry was affected by that. When Gotabaya Rajapaksa was advised by main agricultural experts in the country that he should reverse this policy and go back to the old one, and if he wanted to introduce this organic farming, do it gradually rather than overnight, he didn't listen to that. So several reasons therefore. One is that his tax cut. Second one is the central bank had printed money. Third one is, as a result of that, the inflation went up and the exchange rate started depreciating. There was a big black market for foreign exchange. and we lost all foreign reserves. The fourth one is the agriculture policy. All these factors contributed to cripple Sri Lanka's economy. Then, of course, we were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. That was an external force over which Gotabaya Rajapaksa didn't have any control because it had been given to us. So, COVID-19 pandemic plus the unsound economic policies have crippled Sri Lanka's economy, and in that situation, there's no any other way of following the IMF program. But IMF had said, increase the government revenue, cut down your expenditure program, go back to your old agriculture policy, and allow the exchange rate to depreciate, control inflation, and all these recommendations are there in the IMF program. And in my view, those are actually policies which we could have adopted on our own. We don't have to wait until IMF comes and tells us. But since we had failed to do that, it is good that even an outside has come and made the recommendation to us, and we are following it. Fortunately, after following these economic policies, Sri Lanka had been able to stabilize one part of Sri Lanka's economy, which I call the financial sector. Inflation had come down. Now it is about 1%. Exchange rate has been stable around say 300 rupees per US dollar. Then our agricultural production had started going up after reintroduction of the chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and central bank had been made independent on the recommendations of the IMF, so that central bank doesn't print money anymore for the government. The government has to raise its revenue by taxation, so that there's a limit for the government to have unnecessary expenditure program. So that particular discipline we could have enforced on ourselves, but we failed. So it's good that IMF has come and told us that you have to behave in a very disciplined manner, and because of that reason there's no any other alternative path than going by the IMF program.
Right. So as you described how one process led to another, now printing of money, which led to inflation and then leading it to the economic crisis. Likewise, you explained how the situations were going from one particular section to another. In this scenario, as the former deputy governor of the central bank, what do you think is the role of the central bank, and is that role being played correctly currently with the current government? Is that discipline that you talked about and the correct decisions have been taken currently, and has that led us to follow the correct recommendations given by the IMF?
Well, of course, the short answer to your question, Nimna, is that central bank is doing it well. That's the correct type of policy that it is adopted. To facilitate for central bank do that, IMF had recommended to us long time ago, even as far back as year 2000, that central bank should not print money to finance the government budget. And for that purpose, they had recommended central bank should be independent from the Ministry of Finance. We had accepted that particular policy when I was the deputy governor in the central bank in 2002. We drafted the new Central Bank Act to make it independent. And Ranil Wickremesinghe was the Prime Minister at that time. He accepted it. He said he will introduce that to Parliament and make central bank independent, because one good thing about Ranil Wickremesinghe is that he is a pro-economic reform man. He agreed to do that. So we were expecting the government to make central bank independent. Unfortunately, when Wijewardane Rajapaksa became the president in 2005, his top economic policy advisors had advised him, don't make the central bank independent. So therefore, the draft that we had prepared in year 2002 was shelved by the new government. Then, of course, when Ranil Wickremesinghe became Prime Minister again in 2015 under this good governance government of Maithripala Sirisena, IMF again pushed Sri Lanka to make central bank independent, and another draft was prepared to make the central bank independent by when Indrajit Kumaraswamy was the governor and the current governor was the senior deputy governor, Ranil Wickremesinghe. They prepared it, and Ranil Wickremesinghe had agreed to introduce that also to Parliament. In fact, it was gazetted as a bill. But what happened was 2019, Gotabaya Rajapaksa became president, and his policy advisors were again against the independent central bank. Fortunately for us, after Gotabaya was thrown out of power, his policy advisors were all fired by the new government. Ranil Wickremesinghe became the president. A man who had drafted the Central Bank Independence Act in 2019 was the governor of the central bank. He was supported by the Secretary Minister of Finance, Mahinda Wijewardane. They were able to get Ranil Wickremesinghe government to reintroduce it in parliament. And even the Podu Peramuna party, which had supported Ranil Wickremesinghe, had supported this particular independent act. It was supported by the Samagi Jana Balawega, also led by Sajid Premdasa. Therefore, it was a unanimous decision by parliament to make central bank independent. Now central bank is an independent institution. Now Nimna, you might be thinking that central bank should be independent because Ranil Wickremesinghe wants it or Nandala. No, central bank should be independent for us, for people like you and me. That is because the power which central bank has is to print money. And money printing is the most profitable business that anybody can undertake in any country. Because, for example, if you take a 5,000 rupee note, to print the 5,000 rupee note, the government and the central bank spends only 20 rupees. But by printing a 5,000 rupee note and giving it to us, for example, when you work, say, in this place, your salary may be 5,000 rupees, and if you may have spent, say, 8 hours a day to earn that money, so you have made a big sacrifice of 8 hours of your labor services, and you are getting a little piece of paper called 5,000 rupees, for which the government has spent only 20 rupees. And the government has got the value from you amounting to 5,000 rupees, therefore the profit made by the government is 4,980 rupees per currency note. So therefore, money printing is the most profitable business for any Minister of Finance, and all the Ministers of Finance since independence had been using it liberally. Now central bank cannot do that. Because of the independent central bank cannot now print money and finance the government. So therefore, government will have to, if it wants to spend money, to raise revenue through taxation. That is a direct one. What happens is when the government, central bank prints money, this particular instance, I will tell you now, you are an educated lady, but you have agreed to accept a little piece of paper called 5,000 rupees in exchange of 8 hours of your labor services. No? Why have you done that? That is because the government and the central bank had promised you, if you go to market with this little piece of paper, you can buy, say, 1 kilogram of Lux Spray, milk food. So you were actually exchanging 8 hours of your labor for 1 kilogram of Lux Spray. But the government has done this particular trick with all the people in the country. Not only your neighbor also has got 5,000 rupees, the neighbor's neighbor also has 5,000 rupee note. When all of you go and ask for Lux Spray in the market, the prices will go up. Earlier they promised to give you 1 kilogram of Lux Spray, but now suppose the prices have gone up to 10,000 rupees. So in other words, you are getting now not a 1 kilogram of Lux Spray, but 500 grams of Lux Spray. So what has happened to the balance 500 grams that you have lost? That is a tax that we have paid to the government, and that tax is called inflation tax. So what happens is that we are, as the general public, members of the general public, we do lot of work. We don't steal money from other people. We do an honest job, and by doing that honest job, we are getting this little piece of paper called money into our hand. And the promise is that when we go to the market with that little piece of paper, we are able to buy a basket of goods and services worth of that little piece of paper. And it is the duty of the central bank and the government to protect that right. If we go to market and if we can buy 1 kilogram of milk food as they had promised earlier, then of course they have protected our right. But if they had cheated us and printed more money than necessary and given this money to all the people in the country who would ask for Lux Spray where the Lux Spray is not available, then what happens is that they have cheated us. So because of this reason, it is for the interest and the benefit of the people of the country that the central bank should be independent. Not because Nandalal Veerasinghe or the say the Anura Kumar Disanayaka or Ranil Wickremesinghe wants it independent. It is the people of the country who should demand that central bank should be made independent. It is now independent. They don't print any money now. The government therefore has to raise revenue through taxation, and therefore the inflation tax has been virtually cut to zero by the present central bank management. So that's a good thing. For example, if you go to the market, you can buy Kiri Samba for the same price. And last year also it was 220 rupees. This year also 220 rupees. And some of the goods, the prices have gone down. Last year you would have paid say 50 rupees for an egg. Now you are paying 30 rupees for an egg. So central bank has cut the inflation tax to zero level, which is a good thing for people like us.
Right, okay. So now as you explained the role of the central bank in this economics, also with that we see that the decisions of the politicians and the politics is actually directly combined with the economics of a country. So not only the politics within the country, but also the geopolitics, the international decisions taken by these forces will also affect the economy of a country. So looking into the international view of this point, so how would you take the current trends, current geopolitic trends, and also the current decisions made by the international forces that affects the economy of Sri Lanka?
Well, Nimna, Sri Lanka is a very poor country, and we are beggars. Everyone knows beggars are not choosers. They cannot ask for biryani from the other people. Whatever that has been given to us, we will have to eat it. So our position is that the geopolitical developments are outside Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka cannot escape from that. For example, when it comes to our own region, we are in the middle of the battle between China and India. So we have to get the support from both countries, because we cannot support either country. Then when we expand it to further outer periphery, we find there's a battle between, secret war between USA, the silent war between USA, Russia, China, North Korea on this side, then the European Union on the other side. So when those big fellows are fighting, the small fellows like Sri Lanka will have to pay a price. So that is why it is necessary for a country like Sri Lanka, or a small country like Sri Lanka, to play this game very tactfully, so that neither party will be offended as a result of the action that we have taken. So in the past, of course, Sri Lanka had sometimes, align itself to the West, align itself to the Chinese government, align itself to the Soviet Union. There had been times of political regimes in this country, we had been aligned into one group or other, but the costs have been very enormous because of that reason. Present government, of course, is following a policy of neutrality. They get the support from the West, they get the support from Russia, they get the support from India, they get the support from China. Therefore, it's a proper balancing of the geopolitical situation of the country. In the central bank, it has also to be mindful of this particular development that is taking place outside. Central bank being a state arm, the state institution, it cannot go against the policy of the government. Therefore, what is being done is, when it comes to making choices within the central bank, they always look at how that particular choice would benefit Sri Lanka rather than whether it would benefit the other party. So, for example, now when we deal with India and when we deal with China, those are the two countries which are very close to Sri Lanka, and whenever Sri Lanka is in trouble, those are the two countries, specifically India, that would come to our help. So we cannot offend them, we cannot antagonize them. Central bank also cannot do that. For example, during the crisis period, India had been asking Sri Lanka, because when Sri Lanka went to India for some financial support in 2021, the advice given to us was that go to IMF. If you go to IMF, then only we are able to support you. Then they provided a massive trade line to Sri Lanka. Because of that trade line, they give a loan to Sri Lanka. They even postpone some of the loans that we had to repay to India. So that massive trade line, trade credit that was given to Sri Lanka had helped Sri Lanka to import essential oil, fuel, medicines, food items, and we were able to avoid a crisis, huge crisis within the country because of the Indian support. Even today India is continuing with that particular support. So you can see, Nimna, the geopolitical situation is maybe hostile. India may have its own personal interest in keeping Sri Lanka under its control. But what happens is, since we are a very small island nation, since we are beggars and beggars are not choosers, we cannot go against this mighty India. We cannot do that. We will have to play the game according to their wishes. And in my view, India may be having some say hegemonic type of interest in subduing and controlling Sri Lankan politics, but still it is in the interest of India to do that, because if Sri Lanka, if there is an island, soaring island nation to the south of the Indian subcontinent, which is following a policy hostile to India, which is following a policy which is detrimental to the interest of India, India will not support it. India will not tolerate it. India will definitely change the Sri Lankan government and administration and install an administration which is supporting the Indian interest. So because of this long standing relationship that we had with India, running back to maybe thousands of years, today India is a growing nation, very powerful nation, militarily very powerful nation in the region, the third largest army in the world. So because of this reason, our central bank cannot simply ignore India. Instead, central bank will have to make use of India, and that is what the present central bank administration is doing.
Right. So now, since our program is also named as Modern Talk, we talk about the modern trends in economics and also business. So, Dr. Wijewardane, what do you think are the modern trends? That is, for example, if you take digitalization, if you take now the world is moving to sustainability-based development projects. Now, when you take these type of modern trends, where do you see Sri Lanka at this point?
Well, Sri Lanka has no choice, Nimna, because first thing is that the whole world is moving into a new era of technology, science and technology, and we had the first industrial revolution about say 200 years ago, then we had the second industrial revolution about 150 years ago, third industrial revolution 50 years ago, now we are in the fourth industrial revolution, where the production systems in the world has gone through a massive transformation. We are not doing anything manually anymore. Instead, now today we are talking about the artificial intelligence. We talk about the blockchain technology. We talk about the Internet of Things. Those are the new developments that are taking place in the globe, and all the countries in the world which wants to be leaders in the future will have to follow these new trends. And Sri Lanka should also follow it. For example, our competitors in the region like say Vietnam, then Thailand, China, and also India, they are very much on to the new trend. Sri Lanka is still in the second industrial revolution, because in the first industrial revolution what we did was we converted the manual work to machines. Second industrial revolution, we used the electricity as the driving force. All the machines were driven by electricity. Third one, we did electronics. Fourth one, we have made further advancements in that, and now we are actually thinking about the artificial intelligence, and as I told you, blockchain technology and all so forth. Still, if you go to a garment factory in Sri Lanka, you can see all the machines are driven by electricity, not electronics. So we have missed the third industrial revolution. Now the world is on to the fourth one, So what Sri Lanka should do is, from second industrial revolution, we have to make a quick jump over to the fourth industrial revolution. And other countries are in the process now. Vietnam in 2020 started a new 10-year program, roadmap, to convert Vietnam into the fourth industrial revolution by year 2030. And it's one of the leading competitors to Sri Lanka. And if you take many of the new industrial products that are coming to Sri Lanka, they are actually assembled or manufactured in Vietnam. India is also onto the job. So because of this reason, Sri Lanka has no choice but to go along with the modern trend. There's no question about it. Then you raised another important issue of the sustainability of the development. Now sustainability means something else. Sustainability means that the whole world is losing the natural resources. We have renewable resources, non-renewable resources. The renewable resources are there, they have to be tapped like the sunlight and all the renewable things we have to tap and make use of them. Non-renewable resources, there's a depletion. So as a result, what happens to us is, when we reach this economic development program, we may be enjoying a good life today, but if we don't pass the same good life to the future generations, then of course our economy is not sustainable. In that respect, Sri Lanka has to go along with the global conventions, and one of the global conventions is Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which have been introduced by the United Nations, and Sri Lanka is also one of the subscribers to Sustainable Development Goals. In the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the goals is that by year 2050, we have a net zero emission of the hazardous gases, the climate changing gases to the environment, which is called the green gases. So we have to create a green economy in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka also has to follow the green economy principles. So economic sustainability in terms of the environmental sustainability is a factor that has been given to us, number one. Even then, it is a factor which we will have to do on our own, because if we enjoy a good life today, and if we deny the same good life to our children and grandchildren in the future, then we are not doing the job properly. So therefore, sustainability is a matter that has to be pursued by Sri Lanka in its all economic policies. Technology is a matter which has to be adopted by Sri Lanka in order to be a leader in the world.
Right. So as my final question, I would like to ask, now you mentioned that Sri Lanka has already missed the third industrial revolution and we have to jump on to the fourth industrial revolution. In this scenario, like, are there any urgent or the immediate steps that the government needs to take in order to stabilize this economy? Are there, like, now you mentioned there are certain good practices that has been followed, but are there, other than that, do you have any new suggestions that needs to be adopted urgently for Sri Lanka?
Well, one important thing, Nimna, is that we have to change our mindset. Our thinking will have to be changed. Education will have to be changed. For example, the present government is going to introduce a new educational reform program, and also all the governments in the past had done so, and they have failed. Purpose of education is not just to development of curriculum on modern lines. Purpose of education is to make Sri Lankan, the learner, a creative man, the learning man. You must be you must have a learning culture. You must develop within you a creativity, which is very important thing. Now, for example, Nimna, you told me that you followed first a course, a degree in science, then you change into arts, then you change into law. Now you are in the international relations. That is because your mindset has to be developed in such a way that you must be a creative person. Now, the most important thing that present government should do in order to become a winner in this particular race is to create creativity within Sri Lankans. That is because, as I told you, the only natural resource that we have are the human beings. Every human being has a brain which I call the neck top. On the top of the neck, there's a brain. That brain has to be developed. The job of the education in Sri Lanka is not to develop the followers, not to develop the people who are thinking about King Parakrambahu and going back to Parakrambahu era. Not the people who think about, we must teach history to Sri Lanka institution and not the modern sciences. Because the present day, what should happen is that education at school levels, at university levels, at technical college levels, they have to be creative people. Now, even the present reform program introduced by Prime Minister Harini Amarasuriya, she is talking about the STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. She has forgotten about the art, creative art. I have actually changed the STEM into STEAM, science, technology, creative art and mathematics. Without creative art, nothing can be done. It is the creativity that will take Sri Lanka forward. So, it is better if Harini is changing her the education program from STEM to STEAM. Because in my view, every person should be taught art. Even the scientists will have to be taught art, and you may have experienced it by yourself. When you learn about, you are in the science stream during your school as well as in the university. Art is the most important thing. Take, for example, iPhone. iPhone is a creativity of art. All Apple products are creative, because Steve Jobs had deliberately introduced artistic talents into iPhone, artistic talents into all the Apple products that he had produced, because without art, nothing can be generated. No engineer, no scientist can create a new thing unless he is an artist. So therefore, my advice to the government of Sri Lanka today, you wanted my advice, no? Advice to Harini Amarasuriya is change STEM into STEAM and introduce the artistic talents into the minds of Sri Lankan people, so that all the scientists who are going to be produced and engineers who are going to be produced, they will become talented artists. I mean, how can you design a building if you are not an artist? That's the problem.
Right. So today we were in discussion with the former Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. W.A. Wijewardane. So we are very thankful to you for sharing the insights on the modern trends of the economics. So to our viewers, until we meet with another important program to discuss the modern trends of business and economics, stay informed, stay alert and stay on alert about the modern trends of business and economics.